Christmas is a time of miracles, joy, and warmth. But what if, on this magical night, something happens that makes your heart stop? Not from happiness, but from fear. Today, you'll hear stories sent in by our viewers who experienced something strange, frightening, and, according to them, absolutely real. For them, the night of Christmas became a moment they will remember for a long time, and perhaps for the rest of their lives. The next story takes us to a quiet Christmas Eve, where a father's cozy family night is shattered by a mysterious shadow cast by their beloved Christmas tree and the dark secrets it hides. I still can't bring myself to think about Christmas the same way anymore, not after that night. It was supposed to be a perfect evening. Just me, my wife Emily, and our two kids, Sam and little Lily, bundled up in the living room while the snow fell in thick flakes outside. Our tree stood tall and proud by the window, its lights twinkling in soft hues of red and green. It had taken us hours to decorate earlier that afternoon, and we were all a little tired but content. The kids were sprawled on the rug in their pajamas, playing with Lily's new toy tea set, while Emily and I sipped mulled cider by the fireplace. I remember thinking, this is what the holidays are about. Peace. Family. That peace didn't last long. It started with a sound, a faint rustling, almost too soft to notice, coming from the direction of the tree. At first, I thought it was the cat. Mr. Whiskers had a habit of hiding in the branches whenever we put up the tree, batting at ornaments until Emily or I shooed him away. I leaned over and called out, "Whiskers, you rascal. Come out of there." But Whiskers wasn't in the tree. In fact, he wasn't anywhere. Emily frowned, lowering her mug. "Where is the cat? He's usually all over the place during Christmas." "I don't know," I said, brushing it off. "Maybe he's upstairs." The kids didn't seem to notice. They were too busy arguing over who got the pink teacup. I glanced at the tree again, and for the first time, I noticed something strange. One of the ornaments, a shiny red bauble Lily had picked out earlier, was swaying slightly. The air in the room was still. There was no breeze, no draft. Yet the ornament moved as if nudged by an unseen hand. I felt a prickle of unease but said nothing. I didn't want to ruin the mood. The next hour went by without incident. We opened a few early presents, a family tradition, and took turns playing Christmas songs on the record player. Everything felt normal again, until the lights started to flicker. It happened just as I was reaching for the string of colored bulbs on the mantel to plug them in. A sudden dimming, like someone had thrown a heavy blanket over the house. The tree lights went haywire, flashing wildly for a second before going dark. "What's going on?" Sam asked, sitting up straight. "I don't know. Maybe a power surge." I unplugged the mantel lights and checked the breakers, but everything seemed fine. When I came back, the tree lights had come back on, but only half of them. The other half blinked faintly, casting erratic shadows on the walls. "It's old wiring," Emily said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. "Yeah, maybe." I didn't believe it either. Things got stranger from there. Lily was the first to notice the whispering. She'd been sitting close to the tree, trying to untangle one of the strands of tinsel. Suddenly, she froze and turned to look up into the branches. "Daddy," she said, her voice small and nervous. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what, sweetheart?" I crouched beside her, following her gaze into the dark green needles. "It was talking," she whispered. Emily laughed nervously from across the room. "It's probably just your imagination, honey." "No, it wasn't," Lily insisted. "It said my name." A chill ran down my spine. I looked at Sam, who was watching us with wide eyes, then at Emily, who looked like she was trying to convince herself this was all just kids being kids. I stood up and reached for the tree, pushing the branches apart to get a better look. Nothing was there, just the ornaments and strings of lights. But as I leaned in closer, I caught a whiff of something off. It wasn't the fresh, piney scent of the tree. It was sharper, metallic, like old coins left out in the rain. "Everything okay?" Emily asked, her voice tight. "Yeah," I lied, stepping back. "Probably just the sap." As the night wore on, the atmosphere grew heavier. We tried to distract ourselves, played a board game, read stories, but there was a tension in the room that none of us could shake. The ornaments began falling. One by one, they dropped from the branches, hitting the floor with a soft, deliberate sound. The first time I thought it was because the hooks were loose. I bent down, picked up the ornament, and hung it back up. But then another fell, in another. By the time the fourth ornament hit the floor, Emily was pacing. "What's wrong with this tree?" I didn't have an answer. I was about to suggest we take the decorations down for the night when Sam suddenly gasped. "Look," he shouted, pointing at the wall behind the tree. There was a shadow there, tall, thin, and entirely wrong. It didn't belong to the tree or to anything else in the room, and it was moving. "Sam," I said, my voice trembling, "get your sister and go to your room." "Now." "But Dad." "Go." Emily grabbed both kids and ushered them upstairs. I stood frozen, staring at the shadow. It shifted, twisting unnaturally, as though it was trying to decide what shape it wanted to be. I stepped closer to the tree, my fists clenched. "Who's there?" I demanded. My voice sounded small and ridiculous in the silent room. The shadow didn't answer. Instead, the lights on the tree flared brightly, blinding me for a moment. When I opened my eyes, the shadow was gone. But the room felt wrong. Colder, darker, as if something unseen was watching. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. What happened next still haunts me to this day. But if you think that was the worst of it, you're wrong. That was just the beginning. I sat on the couch long after Emily had taken the kids upstairs. The fire in the hearth was down to glowing embers, and the only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. But I couldn't relax. Every instinct in my body told me something was wrong. The tree stood in the corner, motionless now, its twinkling lights casting pale reflections on the ornaments that hadn't fallen. I kept staring at it, half expecting to see that shadow again, but the room remained still. And yet, the air felt alive. At some point, I must have dozed off. When I opened my eyes, the room was dark. The lights on the tree had gone out again, leaving only the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the snow-covered window. I glanced at the clock. It was just past midnight. That's when I heard it, a scratching sound, soft and deliberate, coming from the base of the tree. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. At first, I thought it might be Mr. Whiskers, finally deciding to show himself. But the sound was too slow, too steady, like nails dragging against wood. I grabbed the fireplace poker and crept toward the tree, each step feeling heavier than the last. "Whiskers," I whispered, though I already knew it wasn't the cat. The scratching stopped. For a moment, the silence was suffocating. I stared into the branches, my breath fogging in the cold air. That's when I noticed it. The metallic smell was stronger now, almost unbearable. It was coming from the tree. Something shifted in the branches. I couldn't see it, but I felt it. A presence. "Get out here," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. The tree shuddered. Not like before, when the ornaments had fallen. It moved as though something inside it was stretching, testing its boundaries. The branches creaked, and I could swear I heard a faint, almost imperceptible giggle. And then it spoke. "Do you like my gift?" The voice was soft, childlike, but it wasn't coming from any of my kids. It was coming from the tree itself. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the poker. "Oh, what are you?" No answer. The tree stood still again, its lights flickering weakly back to life. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined the voice. But as I turned to go upstairs, I heard it again, clearer this time. "Don't go." My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't pleading, it was commanding. I bolted up the stairs to check on Emily and the kids. When I reached Lily's room, I found her sitting up in bed, her little face pale and frightened. "Daddy," she whispered. "It's in my room." "What's in your room, sweetheart?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "The tree," she said, pointing to the corner of her room. I turned to look, and for a moment I saw it. A dark, twisted shadow stretched up the wall, mimicking the shape of the Christmas tree. But this shadow was wrong. Its branches moved unnaturally, writhing like claws. I stepped between Lily and the shadow, gripping the poker tightly. "Leave us alone," I shouted, my voice shaking. The shadow froze. Then, slowly, it began to shrink, pulling itself back into the darkness. Within seconds, it was gone. By the time I got back to the living room, Emily was there, her face pale. "What's going on?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But it's not safe here." She nodded, pulling her robe tighter around her. "Let's get the kids and leave." As we hurried to gather the kids, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The air seemed thicker, colder, and every shadow in the house felt alive. When we reached the front door, I grabbed the handle and pulled. It didn't budge. I yanked harder, but it was like the door had fused shut. "Try the back door," Emily said, panic rising in her voice. We rushed to the kitchen, but the back door was the same. Windows wouldn't open. The house had become a trap. "Daddy," Lily said softly, tugging at my sleeve. "What is it, sweetie?" I asked, kneeling down to her level. She looked up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "It doesn't want us to leave." Before I could respond, the lights in the house went out completely. The next few moments were chaos. Emily screamed, Sam clung to me, and Lily sobbed as the room was plunged into darkness. I fumbled for my phone to use the flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on. The only light came from the tree. Its once warm, colorful glow had turned an eerie, pulsating red. And then the figure emerged. It stepped out from the tree itself, its form shifting and indistinct, as though made of smoke and shadow. It had no face, just hollow voids where eyes should have been. It didn't walk, it glided, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. "Your joy," it said in that same childlike voice. "I need it." I raised the poker, my hands trembling. "Stay back." The figure stopped, tilting its head as if amused. "You brought me here. You dressed me up. You made me strong. What are you talking about?" I shouted. It didn't answer. Instead, it reached out a shadowy hand toward Sam. I don't remember making the decision to attack. One moment, I was frozen in fear. The next, I was swinging the poker with all my strength. It passed through the figure harmlessly, as though striking air. "Burn it," Emily said suddenly, her voice steady. "The tree. We have to burn it?" I didn't question her. We grabbed the kids and ran to the garage, where I found the old metal bucket we used for bonfires. Emily dragged the tree out of its stand, ornaments and all, and we hauled it into the bucket. The entity screamed as the first flames licked at the branches. It wasn't a human scream. It was high-pitched and otherworldly, a sound that made my skin crawl. The tree burned quickly, the fire consuming it in minutes. When the last ember died out, the air in the house felt lighter, warmer, but something wasn't right. As we stood there, staring at the charred remains, Lily spoke up. Her voice was calm, almost sleepy. "Daddy," she said, "it's not gone. It's just hiding." That was the last Christmas we ever celebrated in that house. Even now, years later, I can't look at a Christmas tree without feeling a chill run down my spine. Some nights, I swear I can still hear that faint rustling sound, and the metallic smell comes back to me like a bad memory. We burned the tree. We burned it. But deep down, I know some things can't be destroyed. They can only wait. This tale comes from an anonymous narrator who recalls a family Christmas gathering where an old, mysterious mirror turned their wishes into nightmares and left scars that could never heal. The snow had already piled high by the time we pulled into the driveway, our car tires crunching through the icy gravel. The house loomed ahead of us like some great, slumbering beast, its dark windows staring blankly out at the frost-covered grounds. I hadn't been back here in years, not since Grandma's funeral last spring, and yet the sight of it sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the December cold. "This place hasn't changed a bit," my younger brother, Eric, muttered from the back seat, leaning forward to peer through the windshield. "Except it looks like it's about to collapse," I said, half joking. The old Victorian always had an air of mystery about it, with its creaking floors and winding halls, but now it seemed hollow, like the heart of the home had died along with Grandma. Mom shot us a look from the driver's seat. Enough! It was her wish that we all spend Christmas here. Let's at least try to honor that. I held my tongue, though I couldn't help but feel bitter about the whole thing. Grandma's house was full of memories, sure, but not all of them were happy ones. And being back here, especially for Christmas, felt more like an obligation than a celebration. By the time we finished hauling our bags inside, The house was alive with the sounds of extended family arriving. Cousins, aunts, uncles, people I hadn't seen in years filled the echoing halls with laughter and chatter, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house smelled of dust and decay beneath the faint hint of cinnamon and pine from the Christmas tree in the parlor. Its branches were weighed down with faded ornaments Grandma had insisted on using every year, their once vivid colors dulled by time. And then there was the mirror, the wishing glass, as Grandma had always called it, stood tall and foreboding in the corner of the parlor. Its ornate, golden frame was carved with intricate patterns of vines and roses, the surface so polished it seemed to shimmer even in the dim light. I stopped in my tracks when I saw it, memories rushing back. Every Christmas, like clockwork, Grandma would gather us around the mirror after dinner, telling the same story about how her grandmother had brought it over from Europe. She said the mirror was enchanted, able to grant one wish every Christmas to anyone brave enough to ask. But Grandma had always warned us too. Be careful what you wish for, she'd say, her voice taking on a grave tone. The mirror gives what it takes and takes what it gives. As kids, we'd all laughed it off, treating it as a game. Now, standing in front of it again, I wasn't so sure. Dinner that evening was as chaotic as you'd expect from a family like ours. Eric cracking jokes, Uncle Ron loudly recounting some exaggerated fishing story, and the younger kids sneaking cookies before dessert. It was the kind of messy, noisy normalcy that should have made me feel at ease. But the mirror kept drawing my attention. Even from the dining room, I felt like it was watching us, its surface catching the flicker of candlelight like a living thing. Do you think we'll still do the wishing tonight? Eric asked as he passed me the mashed potatoes. I glanced at Mom, who was deep in conversation with Aunt Susan. I don't know. It doesn't feel right without Grandma. She'd want us to, Eric said, his voice unusually serious. You know she would. I nodded, though the thought filled me with an odd sense of dread. Sure enough, after dinner, Mom announced it was time to gather in the parlor. The room felt colder than the rest of the house, the shadows from the trees, twinkling lights, stretching long and thin across the floor. We all sat in a rough circle, the mirror standing at the center like a silent sentinel. Mom took her place beside it, her expression distant. I know it's hard, being here without her, she began, her voice wavering. But this was her tradition. She believed the wishing glass brought our family closer, even if just for one night. There was a murmur of agreement, though I caught a few skeptical glances from my cousins. Most of us had outgrown the magic years ago. Mom reached out and touched the edge of the mirror's frame, her fingers brushing the carved roses. Does anyone want to go first? The silence stretched, awkward and heavy, until my younger cousin Grace stood up. She was barely 16, with a rebellious streak that showed in her dyed hair and scuffed boots. I'll do it, she said, rolling her eyes at the look she got. It's just a stupid mirror, right? She stepped forward, her reflection shimmering unnaturally as she leaned closer. For a moment, it looked like her reflection was moving out of sync with her real movements, but I blinked and it was gone. I wish, Grace said, smirking, that people would actually notice me for once. Her words hung in the air, and for a second, nothing happened. Then the room seemed to exhale, the mirror's surface rippling like water. Grace stepped back, looking both embarrassed and annoyed. See? Nothing. Before she could finish, the lights flickered. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch toward her, and I swear I saw her reflection still standing in the mirror, staring at her even after she'd stepped away. Grace? Mom asked, her voice tight. Grace opened her mouth to reply, but no sound came out. Her face twisted in confusion and then fear as she looked down at her hands. They were fading, becoming translucent like smoke dissipating in the wind. Grace! Aunt Susan screamed, rushing forward, but it was too late. Grace vanished, her body dissolving into thin air. The room erupted into chaos, everyone shouting and scrambling, but I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on the mirror. Grace's reflection was still there, pressed against the glass, her mouth open in a silent scream. Stop looking at it, Eric shouted, grabbing my arm, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The mirror's surface rippled again, the reflection of Grace fading into darkness. And then, for just a moment, I thought I saw something else, something deeper, a pair of hollow, glowing eyes staring back at me. The room was suffocatingly quiet after Grace vanished. No one moved, no one spoke, until Aunt Susan let out a choked sob and dropped to her knees. "She's gone," she whispered. "She's really gone." I shook my head, unable to tear my eyes from the mirror. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "She's in there. I saw her. She's still in the mirror." All eyes turned to the wishing glass. The ripples in its surface had settled, leaving behind a flawless reflection of the room. But it wasn't flawless. Shadows shifted and stretched in ways they shouldn't, and for just a moment, I thought I saw a hand, Grace's hand, pressing against the inside of the glass before it faded. "What do we do?" Eric asked, his voice trembling. "We get her back," Aunt Susan said, standing abruptly. She lunged toward the mirror, tears streaming down her face. "Grace, can you hear me? Baby, I'm here." Mom grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Stop, Susan. You can't touch it." "Why not?" Aunt Susan snapped, yanking her arm free. "My daughter's in there. What am I supposed to do? Just leave her. We don't know what's happening." Mom shouted. "You saw what it did to her. We don't even understand what this thing is." "She made a wish," I said, stepping between them. "It's like Grandma always said. The mirror gives you what you ask for, but it twists it. It feeds on you." "That's ridiculous," Uncle Ron said, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "It's just a damn mirror. You're all acting like it's alive or something." "It is," I said, glaring at him. Ron rolled his eyes. "Fine. If it's so powerful, then let me prove it. I'll make a wish right now, and you'll see there's nothing to worry about." "Don't," I warned, but he was already moving toward the glass. Uncle Ron stopped in front of the mirror, squaring his shoulders. He was trying to look confident, but I saw his hand trembling. "I wish," he said, staring at his reflection, "that people would respect me, that they'd actually listen to me for once." The room seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mirror's surface shimmered, ripples spreading out like a stone had been dropped into water. Ron took a step back, glancing around nervously. "See? Nothing to." He froze mid-sentence. His reflection didn't step back with him. Instead, it leaned closer, its head tilting unnaturally. Slowly, it raised a hand and pointed right at him. The air grew heavy, oppressive. Then came the sound, slow, deliberate footsteps echoing through the house, even though no one was moving. "Do you hear that?" Eric whispered, gripping my arm. I nodded, my stomach turning. The footsteps grew louder, closer. And then, out of the shadows on the walls, figures began to appear. They weren't people, at least, not anymore. They were silhouettes of people, their forms blurry and indistinct, like smudges on an old photograph. Their faces were blank, featureless ovals, and yet they all turned toward Ron. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, backing away. The figures didn't answer. Instead, they dropped to their knees, bowing stiffly, almost mechanically. Their heads turned upward to face him, their blank faces tilting unnaturally. "This is respect," the mirror whispered. Its voice was soft, almost childlike, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once. "No," Ron said, shaking his head. "No, this isn't what I wanted." The figures began to chant. Not words, but a low, guttural hum that vibrated through the room. They bowed lower and lower, their movements jerky, like puppets with broken strings. "Make it stop!" Ron screamed, clutching his head. The chanting grew louder, the figures collapsing in on themselves as if they were breaking apart. And then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, they were gone. Ron fell to his knees, gasping for air. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he stared at the mirror. "Never again," he whispered. We didn't have time to catch our breath. The mirror's surface was shifting again, the shadows within growing darker and more chaotic. I could feel it pulling at us, feeding on the fear in the room. "We have to destroy it," Eric said suddenly. "No," Mom said sharply. "If we destroy it while Grace is in there." "She's gone," Ron muttered, his voice hollow. "She's already gone." "No, she's not," I said, standing. My hands were clenched into fists. "I saw her. She's still in there, and I'm going to get her out." I stepped toward the mirror, my heart pounding. Its surface rippled as I approached, as if it were alive, waiting for me. "What are you doing?" Mom asked, her voice trembling. "I'll make the last wish," I said. "No," Mom shouted, grabbing my arm. "You don't know what it'll do to you." "I don't care," I said, pulling free. "If it'll save Grace, I'll do it." I faced the mirror, staring into its depths. My reflection looked back at me, but there was something wrong about it. Its eyes glinted with something cruel, something knowing. "I wish," I said, my voice shaking, "that this mirror would leave my family alone forever." The mirror reacted instantly. Its surface turned black, cracks spreading across the glass like a web. The air in the room grew colder, and a piercing, inhuman scream filled my ears. I stepped back as the mirror began to crumble, shards of glass falling to the floor. When the last piece shattered, there was silence. The mirror was gone. Only the empty golden frame remained, lying lifeless on the floor. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then, faint and distant, I heard a whisper. "Wishes never end." We never saw Grace again. The house was sold within weeks, and we all went our separate ways, trying to forget that night. But I never did. Sometimes, when I catch my reflection in a window or a polished surface, I feel it watching me. The mirror may be gone, but its shadow lingers. And deep down, I know the truth. Wishes never end. Jake Carter shares a haunting memory from his teenage years, when a mysterious knocking on Christmas Eve brought his family face to face with the unexplainable, and a black cat whose arrival would change their lives forever. I was 16 years old, and it was Christmas Eve. Outside, snow fell steadily, blanketing the neighborhood in a soft, unbroken white. Inside, the living room glowed with the warmth of the fireplace, the twinkle of lights on the Christmas tree, and the soft laughter of my parents. We were huddled together, opening stocking gifts and sipping eggnog, a family tradition we cherished every year. The world felt quiet, still, and safe, the kind of peace only a snowstorm could bring. And then the knocking started. It came suddenly, sharp and deliberate. 3 loud bangs on the front door. We all froze. The sound didn't belong. It cut through the quiet like a knife, out of place and unwelcome. My dad, sitting nearest to the window, leaned forward to peer out. "There's no one there," he said, his brow furrowing. Must have been the wind, but we all knew it couldn't have been. The door knocker was heavy, solid brass, something only a person could move. My mom shifted uneasily in her chair, glancing toward the door. The knocking came again, this time louder. My dad stood up, the chair scraping against the floor, and walked toward the door. "Stay back," he said firmly, glancing over his shoulder. My mom and I exchanged worried looks but stayed where we were. I watched as he unlatched the deadbolt, then hesitated, his hand on the doorknob. "Be careful," my mom whispered. He nodded and swung the door open. At first, I couldn't see what he was looking at. He just stood there staring down at the threshold, his breath fogging in the cold air. Then, slowly, he stepped aside and I saw it. A black cat lay sprawled across the snow, its fur matted with blood. I gasped, and my mom rushed to the door, pulling her robe tighter against the chill. The cat was alive, but barely. It let out a faint, pitiful meow as it shifted weakly. "Where did it come from?" my mom asked, her voice trembling. "That's the weird part," my dad said. He gestured toward the snow. No footprints, no tracks, just this. He was right. The fresh snow around the cat was undisturbed. No sign of anyone walking up to the house or even a car stopping nearby. It didn't make sense. Whoever, or whatever, had brought the cat here had vanished without a trace. "Maybe it crawled here," my mom said, though her voice lacked conviction. "How?" my dad replied, shaking his head. "It's too hurt to move like that." The cat let out another weak cry, and that decided it. "We can't just leave him out here," I said, already moving to grab a blanket. We brought the cat inside, setting him on a soft towel near the fireplace. He was young, maybe a year old, with sharp green eyes that looked far too alert for his injured state. His fur was ragged, his body covered in scratches, and one of his ears was torn. As we cleaned him up, I noticed something odd. His injuries didn't seem fresh. The blood in his fur was dry in some places, as though whatever had happened to him had been hours ago. And yet, somehow, he'd ended up at our door, alive and meowing for help. We decided to call him Shadow, a name my dad suggested with a wry smile. "Fits, doesn't it?" he said, scratching the cat's uninjured ear. Shadow purred faintly, his eyes half closed. Over the next few days, Shadow began to recover. We took him to the vet, who stitched up his ear and treated his wounds. He wasn't microchipped, and no one had reported a missing black cat in the area, so we decided to find him a new home. My mom gave him to a family friend who lived just down the street. They had 2 kids and a cozy home, and Shadow seemed to settle in quickly. I visited him a few times in the weeks that followed, and he always seemed happy and healthy, curling up in the sunny spots on their living room carpet. It wasn't until months later that we realized just how special Shadow really was. It was late spring when it happened. I remember waking up to the sound of sirens in the distance and seeing smoke rising from the direction of our neighbor's house. When we rushed over, the family was standing outside, shaken but unharmed. The garage had caught fire in the middle of the night. One of their cars was engulfed in flames, and the fire had begun to spread to the rest of the house. "What happened?" my dad asked, his voice filled with concern. Their youngest son pointed to Shadow, who was perched on the porch, his tail flicking back and forth. "He saved us," the boy said simply. Their dad explained. Shadow had woken them up, howling and clawing at their bedroom door. He wouldn't stop until they followed him downstairs, and that's when they smelled the smoke. If he hadn't alerted them, they might not have escaped in time. "That cat's a hero," the firefighter said, giving Shadow a scratch behind the ears. After that, the family renamed him Clark, after Superman. Clark lived a long, happy life, loved by everyone who met him. But I never forgot the night he came to us, the mysterious knocking, and the lack of footprints in the snow. To this day, I can't explain how he got there or why. But sometimes, when I think about it, I wonder if Clark wasn't just a cat. Maybe he was something more, something sent to protect us in ways we'll never fully understand. These were just a few of the chilling tales that remind us Christmas isn't always as peaceful as it seems. If you've experienced something strange or unexplainable, we'd love to hear your story. Submit your own terrifying encounters to our email, which you can find in the bio below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the shadows of Christmas hide more than just holiday cheer.